Hi and welcome to another episode of PeaceMeg TV. In this first video on the new series of sequencing MIDI drums with Reaper, we're going to be taking a look at the basic elements of creating our MIDI tracks, applying the EZ Drummer effects to that particular track, separating it out into multiple channels, and taking a look at how we can start off by creating our first sequence drum beat in the MIDI editor. So let's see how that's all done. So the first step is we need to create a virtual instrument channel into Reaper. Now to do that we can simply right click over the left hand section and then say insert virtual instrument on new track, or we can go to insert virtual instrument on new track. Both will achieve the same result. So we'll click on that. That'll ask us what is the virtual instrument we want to actually create, or what we want to insert into our timeline. I'm going to use EZ Drummer, but you could be using Slate drums, you could be using Superior Drummer, you could be using all manner of different VSTs, virtual instruments. So I'm going to click on Toontrack and I'm just going to choose EZ Drummer. And the first thing that's going to do is ask me, do you want to output these to multiple channels? So instead of keeping all this on one channel, we can separate each of those instrument channels out onto their own channel, so we can then mix and adjust and apply effects and things like that to each one of the individual channels. It's the best way of working because it gives you a lot more flexibility. So the first thing I'm going to do is say yes. That will create the virtual instrument entry, and it will also show me all of the new tracks. So if I scroll through, you can see we've now created 16 independent channels or independent tracks, all up to the EZ Drummer, which is the sort of the master. That's where your MIDI information will be placed. So we've done that, but that hasn't actually routed the information to each one of those channels. That's only created the channels. So what we need to do is switch over to the mixer in EZ Drummer, and this works exactly the same if you're using Superior Drummer. You can switch over to the mixer in that, and you can see that we've got the kick and snare and so on, and each one of those is currently output into channel 1. So what we need to do is tell it we want to go to multi-channel. So if I click on any of these, you can see we can designate where we want to route these channels, or we can just go with multi-channel, and that will automatically route to the relevant channels that have been created in Reaper. So you see nothing's happened, but it has actually gone through and created the individual channels and routed everything exactly as we want. So you can see we've got a mixer panel inside EZ Drummer. We can use this to fine-tune our levels, and if you take a look at my video on dealing with gain staging with virtual instruments, one of the instruments that I concentrated on there was EZ Drummer, and how we can use the actual mixer in EZ Drummer itself to adjust our levels before they get to the faders to give us a good gain staging mix. If you haven't checked that video out, I recommend going to take a look at it, and let's just crack on now with how we can work with this. So everything is routed as we need it to be. The next thing I'm going to do is going to go through and actually name each one of these channels so they correspond to the same channel name that we've got in EZ Drummer. That just makes it a lot easier when we come to mixing or taking a look at tracks that we don't need, or we want to mute or do anything with. We'll know exactly which track corresponds with which. So I'm going to go and do that very quickly, and I'll come back when that's all done. Okay, so I've named all of the tracks. As you can see, we've got a couple that are free, so they're empty tracks. Now we could delete those if you want to, just to free up resources and free up space, but they're kind of useful if we want to route, say for example we're using a double kick, we may want to route one kick to one channel, a second kick to a different channel, and that way we can actually create the facility to create effects and things like that, and EQ the drums differently to give them slightly different sounds. There's lots of reasons why you may want to do this, but if you don't have any reason to do it, then you can just easily delete those empty channels. Okay, so we've done the basics. We've put together our initial channel strip. We've put everything in there, or so each of our channels for this particular virtual instrument, I should say. So we've created all that, we've named them. The next thing I like to do is, I'm just going to close this down, is I like to create a master track or master channel that I can then use to route all of my effects that apply to the overall drum kit and not just into specifics. So I'm just going to create a new, I'm going to call this one Drums Master, and all we'll do is we'll take that up to the top so it sits above the EZ Drummer entry, and then we'll just select all of the drum channels that sit below it. So that's just first select the first one, Control and Shift, select the last one, and then just drag that, indent it over to the right slightly, so we've now set that to be the parent for all of the drum tracks, including the EZ Drummer track. So now we can apply effects to the overall drum kit, and we can also apply it to individual pieces of the kit, including the overhead mics and the reverb, room reverb and things like that. So you've got a flexible starting point for working with our drums. Now for me, I just tend to like to color code these things up red, so I'm going to do the same thing. Select them all, right click, track color, set custom track color, and set them to red. So my drum kits are always set red. So we're ready to start. Now whenever you work with a virtual instrument in Reaper, you create your virtual instrument like we've done in the first part of this video, and now we have to create the actual MIDI information. So we need to put a MIDI item onto our virtual instrument track, and then we can start adding the notes or the drum beats and things like that in. So all I'm going to do is select a portion, and we'll just choose a couple of bars. So we'll just choose like that. Now I've got a shortcut on my toolbar which is insert new MIDI item, but if you don't have that, all you need to do is highlight like I've done, make sure you've got the relevant track selected, and then you can just go to insert new MIDI item. Both will do exactly the same thing. So if I come back to my icon, click, there's our new MIDI track, blank and ready to start going. And if I undo that with Control and Z, and I just go to insert new MIDI item, it does exactly the same thing. So there's the starting point for our MIDI information. We've got a blank MIDI holder that's going to last for X number of bars. We've got the drum kit set up, so all we need to do is actually start inputting some of the drum beats. So if I just double click, that will open up the MIDI editor. I'm just going to bring this over so we can see what we're working with. Okay, so at the moment we've got a virtual keyboard that if I just hit some of the keys, you can hear we've got various different drums on there. But how are we going to know what applies to what? Well, Reaper gives us a very useful little feature that allows us to load in the actual instrument names for each one of these MIDI channels. So everything on there that's got a MIDI sample assigned to it in EZ Drummer or whatever VST you're using, we can assign that to the keyboard that's relevant, or the key that's relevant on our keyboard. So because of the way I've got this set up with my screen, I don't have the menus available to me at the top. So what I'm going to do is on this little tab at the bottom, I can just right click, which brings up a copy of the normal sort of navigation bar that's at the top of the MIDI editor. And I can just go to File, Customize Note Names, and I can just say I can load that in from a file. So I can just click Load Note in from a file, and it just loads in a text file. Now you can download these from the Reaper stash, or you can create your own, very quick and easy. But you can see I've got a few already set up for me down the bottom. So I've got EZ Drummer 2 MIDI note name. So I'll just click on that. And even though you can't see it particularly brilliantly, you'll see now the relevant keys now have the name of the sample that's on there applied to it. The tom hits, and so on. Okay, so that's the first part. Now let's take a look at how we can create some simple drum beats. So let's take a little look at what we have to work with. This matrix is simply a case of each of the bars in your time, in the piece that you're working on, and you can have it broken down into 16ths, 8ths, quarter notes, 30-second notes, right the way up. At the moment we've got 16th notes, so you can see that at the bottom of the window I've got the grid. That'll tell me how it's split up, so we can see we've got half notes, quarter notes, 88th notes and so on. So let's put that into quarter notes just to simplify it. We can choose to be straight, triplet, dotted, swing. There's lots of different things you can do to set this up. I'm not going to go into too much detail because we're going to concentrate on a simple drum sort of beat in this particular video. So what will happen is if I find my kick, which is C2, all I need to do is double click to place a drum beat. And I can do the same thing for the snare, which is the rim shot. And we'll do the second for another beat. And again, ooh, wrong one. So there we go, we've got a very simple drum beat. Let's rewind that. Incredibly slow drum beat. So let's just ramp the BPM per second. Just set that up to about 170, just to get a bit quicker. Okay, so let's try that again. Quite unimaginative, but a drum beat nonetheless. So we can add some hi-hats in, and we'll just drop that on every quarter note. I'll just highlight those, hold the control key down, drag over to duplicate, drag over to duplicate, and that'll happen in there. So if we just rewind, press play, we have something that resembles an incredibly boring drum beat. But let's just go over what we've done so we can have a better idea of what's going on. Each of these little diamonds is triggering a sample. So you can see we trigger in the hi-hat samples, we're triggering the bass and the kick, so the kick and the snare drum. And then down the bottom we've got the velocity. Now this controls how hard each one of these hits is being represented. And if you're using a VST like Superior Drummer or EZ Drummer, they're multi-sample, so as you adjust the velocity, the actual sound of the snare or the kick drum or the hi-hat being hit will change characteristics as if a drummer is actually hitting that particular drum element softer or harder. So you can use that to your advantage to make things sound a lot more natural. You know, nobody is ever going to hit the kick drum with their foot if they're playing single or double kick drum with the same velocity every single time. So you can adjust that to your own advantage to make it sound a little bit more human, and we'll take a look at how we can do that in an automated fashion later. But just for now, let's just take a look at what we've got in the actual velocity window at the bottom. So if we take a look at this kick drum, if I click on it, it'll highlight the relevant entry inside the velocity strip at the bottom. And then I can just click and drag and hold, and then just drag that down. And you should see then the corresponding number on the hit itself will tell you the velocity from maximum, which is 127, down to minimum, which is 1. So we can adjust that and alter the actual sound of the kick drum and the velocity of the kick drum to make it sound more human. We can right drag to select a group and do the same thing again. We can just grab any of these, drop them down to make them lighter hits. So let's just do the same with all the kick drums. We'll just drop those down in velocity, and we do the snares quite hard. So if I just rewind that and play now, you can see the drums start to sound a little quieter. The snare stands out because it's still hitting at full velocity, whereas the kick drums and the hi-hats are at lower velocity. But it still sounds like a machine. So one way you can sort of get around things like that is to do things like select every other hi-hat hit. We'll just do that by clicking on the first one we want, holding down the control key and selecting every other hi-hat hit. And what we can do is we can increase the velocity on that ever so slightly. And what that'll do is it'll give it a slight swing to the actual hi-hats as they're being played. So they'll be hard, soft, hard, soft, hard, soft, for example. So you'll get a more natural sort of swing feel to the hi-hats, which will add that more human element to it. So let's take a little listen. Pretty simple, nothing complex about that. But it does sound a lot more human. It's adding that dynamic into the actual drum beat itself. So let's just say we want to add some more additional beats in there, but we can't actually put anything inside these sort of quarter notes. So if I wanted to put something in between the quarter note, if I click, it'll just jump to the relevant quarter note. So what I can do is I can just simply change the grid to be eighth notes in this example, and I can put a second kick drum hit in on every other beat. So we can now rewind that back. So, very simple. And you can do the same. You can get really creative with this. You can say, well, I want to go into 30-second notes, zoom in, and I'm just using the mouse wheel to zoom in on this. You can use, you know, various different methods to zoom in and out. So you could then start to sort of say, well, I want to put some extra notes in there. And we just not very interesting, but you kind of get the idea of what I'm doing. And I can move these notes around just by simply grabbing them, just click, hold, drag it to wherever I want to adjust it, and I can adjust the velocity on the velocity strip at the bottom, and we can quickly and easily make up more interesting drum beats just by adding extra notes in. I'll switch this all back to eighth notes, and we can just create a simple rock drum beat, should we say. There we go. Nothing complex. But that's showing you the basics of working with MIDI drums, working with virtual instruments. In the second video, we'll take a look at how we can add more dynamic elements to the drums, how we can change the drum kits, and how we can get a bit more creative. I hope you found this video useful. If you've got any comments or feedback, please put them in the relevant box below this video. If you like the video, please hit the like, because it really does help. And if you like what we do on ReaperTV, please hit the subscribe button. Until next time, take care.